sugar in it.
You want some more in it?
No.
It's a low test. You gotta jack
If I'm gonna read, I need Coke.
it up. Oh, I'll keep that.
So you've got your marching orders.
Right.
Yes, last time I checked, I was down to 154. The name's close to about 190.
Yeah, definitely tough.
I usually have clothes that are too tight or they fall off.
Oh. Hi, Liz.
I wanted to come and say hi. How
Yeah, I
are you?
appreciate it. I'm good. How's your mom?
Um,
We talked to Brad last week.
she came home last Saturday,
Okay.
and so she's having a lot of therapy in the house and physical therapy, occupational therapy.
Okay, in her own house or
Yeah,
yours?
here in her house.
Okay.
But this Friday, my brother who lives with her is going for
Let's go out somewhere and get ice cream.
Okay.
Get that out of my pocket. Yeah.
So we've been running to appointments all week. On Friday, we were at 8 o'clock.
All right.
Oh, my
Got my mom to
goodness.
her chief of pets because they thought she had cancer, but that's clear, so we're grateful for that.
Right, right.
And then we got Ken up to Cleveland, and he had 7 appointments that afternoon, so. Roger, I'm taking your seat. Oh, okay.
Sorry, I forgot to watch for you. Here's your coffee.
I couldn't see you.
I know.
Good morning, Roger.
Hi, who's this?
Liz.
Hello, hello.
Meant to bring a book for your husband this morning.
Oh.
Forgot it.
It's nice to see you both.
You
That color
too.
is perfect.
Oh, thank you.
Pretty.
Certain times of
Yeah.
year.
Oh,
Yeah, when it's nice and warm.
Right.
Oh,
Come
oh,
here,
okay.
too.
Okay.
I'm telling you. Good morning. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. It is so beautiful outside. I was telling Brad Beach we've had company like for the last 6 weeks, and the last of them left about an hour ago. God is good. It's been a wonderful number of weeks. So glad that you could be here this day. Today is going to be, I hope, a fun and an interesting day. What we are going to study today, I wonder if this still works the way I hoped it would. Come on. Come on. You know, I got a feeling that
We try our darndest to make you look interesting. Let's see.
oh, there you go.
Hey.
You have to turn it on. Side story. Years ago, we had a guest lecturer in Canton at our congregation, and we had a very nice full sanctuary. That was back when people used to attend. And he asked the question to the congregation, what would really make you happy? And one of the guys in the congregation says, I'd love to win the lottery. And somebody over here yells, well, you got to buy a ticket. And they were right. So we are back together today for session 3, and we're going to be continuing our learning with Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, a little bit different than we did last week. Just to tell you what's coming up, next week, session 4, we're going to talk about another Lawrence, Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman. Larry Hoffman was a professor of theology and liturgy. And Hoffman wrote a number of books, which I find kind of extraordinary for the study of liturgy, of the Haggadah, for Passover, and so on. And we're going to take a look at that because we're going to talk about how Jews study. Okay? It's not that we study in some different magical way than Christians do, but there is a distinctive way that Jews look at things in terms of how we study. So we're going to look at that next week. And then session 5, the last of our time together, we're going to get rid of the Larrys, and we're going to talk about Rabbi Norman Cohen, who wrote a book called Self-Struggle and Change, Family Conflict Stories in Genesis and their healing insight for our times. How does he use the biblical text to investigate and understand the complex relationships that we have in our lives today? And that'll be fun too. Never studied with him either, except for his book. So, today, the text that we're going to be looking at is Larry Kushner's book called Invisible Lines of Connection. Now, if you think back to what we talked about last week, about his concept of Jewish mysticism and so on, that invisible lines of connection ought to raise something in your mind. Because remember, he sort of talked about how there was a belief that everything is connected beneath the surface. You might not know it, but everything is connected beneath the surface. The main points that he talked about last week were that the mystic is someone who has the gnawing suspicion that the apparent brokenness, disharmony, cacophony, cuckoo-ness, nothing fits together, brokenness, life is a mess, conceals a hidden unity. God knows, as we look at, listen to the news today, all those descriptions seem to come together, and it's hard to believe that there is a hidden unity underneath. Some people believe that the hidden unity is the work of the devil, and that, at the end of time is coming, and we'll have that final cataclysmic battle. That's not what Jewish mystics believe, but that's one of the principles that Kushner helps us understand. And he also says everything is God. Everything is God. And that becomes an important thing to understand as we go ahead on our program today. And then he says, beneath the surface, all is connected, whence the title, Invisible Lines of Connection. Now, before I go to the next slide, just want to talk about for a moment a distinction between two different kinds of Jewish literature. And again, I'm sure that you will have the same kinds of distinctions amongst the literature, that is the literature of the church. And the distinction that I want to make is the difference between literature that is about halacha, Jewish law. Halach means to go, to walk. So halacha is how you go or walk about life to be within the framework of Jewish law. And the other part of it is called Agadah, which is the root word for Haggadah, which is the whole concept of story. These two, there are many different other kinds of literature, but these two distinctive things, literature about law and literature about lore, if you will, are always in tension. And the Agadah, the story, very often helps to explicate the halacha, to illustrate the halacha. I'll give you a quick example of what a midrash Agadah sounds like. And you maybe know the story. We all know that from Bible in Genesis that Abraham started out as Avram, Abram, not Abraham, but because he recognized that God was one, not many, not wood, not stone, not fire, Not clouds, not air, not mountains, but God was one. He entered into this relationship with the one God, the creator of all, and that relationship ended in a covenant and so on. Well, what does that mean? How did that happen? And you might have heard this story. Abraham's father, Terach, was an idol manufacturer. He had a nice showroom, and he had idols of wood and stone. You go in and you pick, well, I want that one because it's fertility. I want that one because it's safety for the house. And you'd go and buy your idols. So one day, Terach says to his son Abraham, I've got to go to town to buy some stuff. And while I'm gone, if you're going to go into family business, you mind the store. So Terach goes trotting down to town to buy some stuff. And Abram's looking at the showroom. And of course, in the middle of the showroom is your finest merchandise. So in the middle of the showroom is this huge stone idol, and it's got a stick in its hand. So Abraham takes the stick, and what do you think he does with it? He is an iconoclast. He breaks all the other idols, and they're laying in heaps of stone. And of course, just as he looks around and sees all these heaps of stone, here comes Daddy walking up the path. And his father comes in. You ready for this? This is the humorous part of the story. His father walks in and says, "My gods." Get it? My gods, not my God. My gods, what has happened here? And Abraham says, the big idol did it. Okay, so that is a story that teaches you about the breaking of the myth of multiple idols and gods and so on. The story helps to explain what monotheism means. So when we look at Midrash Halacha, the explanation of law, we're going to talk about, how do we know how much it takes to make something kosher, not kosher. We're going to talk about how far can you walk on the Sabbath and all those law kinds of things. But when we look at the Agadah, the stories, they will explain what these principles are all about. Now you understand why I followed last week's program that talked about some of the interpreters of the biblical story of Jacob's ladder with today's program, which are going to be Kushner's stories. And we might think, they're just Kushner's stories, but I'm going to suggest to you that what we're going to be reading are the Kushner's stories that are really Midrash Agadah, the Midrash of stories that explain the principles that we're talking about here. Okay? We move on. This is the way he begins the book. First, a quotation from Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin. The first premise of faith is to believe that there is no such thing as happenstance. Every detail, small or great, they are all from the Holy One. All is God. Nothing happens by accident. But what about the, what do you call them when a cell or a gene changes? What about mutations? Thank you very much. I needed that help. What about mutations? Well, maybe the particular mutation is not a planned thing, but the process whereby things mutate is planned. Okay? So everything is part of the Holy One. And then I just looked at this yesterday. The most interesting quotation, I think, in the whole book. The book was written in the 90s, I believe. I believe computers can think. When you ask one a question and it replies, that reminds me of a story. And I looked at that and I said, artificial intelligence? My goodness, the rabbis will be out of work. It's amazing. At any rate, so this is a book of stories. And we're going to look at this book, which is divided into 4 sections. The first section has 11 stories, and it's about reverence. The second section, 11 stories about inheritance. The third section, 10 stories about responsibility. And then the conclusion, 11 stories. The stories are, short as 1 page and as much as 2 or 3 or 4. It's very, very readable. I first found this book when my son was, my younger boy, Gabriel, was going back and forth to Washington, D.C. He had a job at the Holocaust Museum, and so he came home to visit one time, and he drove back to Washington. He was going over the mountains, and it was foggy. He was being very careful about where he was going because he doesn't see real well. And so a cop pulled him over and thought he was reckless driving, gave him a ticket. So Gabriel came home and said, I really wasn't driving recklessly. I have a good explanation for it. I was really actually being safe, not reckless, and I want to fight the ticket. And I thought to myself, good luck. But being a father and not having a lot of time with my kid, I said, I'll tell you what, I will drive with you to the court in whatever the place was close to Washington, and I'll sit with you in court, and then we'll come home. And I found this book, and because of the short stories, what happened was we would be driving, and I would read the stories to him. And I was absolutely captivated by the stories. He, by the way, did beat the ticket. He did beat the ticket. God bless him in my pocketbook. So we're going to look at 4 stories today. The first one is going to be read by Leanne. It's called The Hidden Signature. In a sense, it's probably the most complex of the stories because it's a little longer and you have to listen a little closer. The second one is called Stranger on the Bus. Is that whistling or is that just my hearing aid? We're okay? Okay. Okay, that's good. That means that these are working because I could hear it. The second story, Stranger on the Bus, is absolutely my very favorite story, and that's going to be read by Cindy. The third story is An Act of God, and that's going to be read by my colleague and friend and host at his house, wonderful meal, is very nice, by Brad Beach. And then the last one, if we have time, is the last word, the last part of the book, and I will read that myself. What I'd like you to do is you hear the stories. I'd like you to listen to them, to think about them, and the first question that I'm going to ask after each story is, what did it make you think about? And why do I ask that? Because, when you hear something or see something, before you do, process it through all the intellectual hoo-has and goo-gahs that we have, it directs you to something. I remember when, or that does sounds like this, or it makes me think of that. I'd like to have those initial reactions. So we're going to read the story, take a few moments to talk about it, and then move on to the next. Clear? Simple? You're going to love it. And we have a microphone for you to use, and we've picked, as though I've picked, the people who volunteered to read these stories are excellent dramatic readers. I want you to pretend that we're back in the 40s before television was everywhere and you used to listen to the stories on the radio. Would you care to begin?
The Hidden Signature. I remember the first computer game we ever got. Since hardly anyone owned computers in those days, you had to use your television set for a monitor. By plugging a cable into the antenna jack, you turned the TV into a primitive video arcade. Then you could play ping pong in monochrome. You operated a little paddle that moved up and down along one side of the screen. The ball, actually a white square, moved horizontally. With enough coordination, you could get your paddle to intersect its trajectory, whereupon you heard the game's sole sound effect. Bip. And so it went. Bip, bip, bip. After you got good at it, you could crank up the speed. Bip, 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 bip. People in our home who shall remain nameless played it for hours. A few years later, Atari became the rage. As I recall, Atari initially had 4 different games. My favorite was called Adventure. It was your basic Dungeons and Dragons genre with different castles and rooms, a key, hidden doorways, a bat that could steal the key, even whole areas where the obstacles were invisible. Our whole family really got into it. The kids, of course, quickly surpassed their parents. They would come home from school with new tips and tricks. Some of them were even undocumented, which is computer talk for saying that such maneuvers were not written down in any manual. One of the most amazing came home from junior high with my daughter. In a particular place inside the Black Castle, the diligent searcher could find a small white dot that was too small to be noticeable as a normal game object. Indeed, if you did not find it, you would think it was only a glitch in your video monitor. By taking this dot back to the starting screen, however, you could enter a hidden, otherwise inaccessible room. Entering the room had absolutely nothing to do with playing the game. All you would find in the room was a rainbow and the name of the person who invented the game. For all I know, every computer programmer does something like this. Somewhere behind some hidden wall, available only to the initiated, there is another room, and in that room is the name of the artist. What I want to know is, if the signature of the creator, and that word is capitalized here, is not just in some hidden room, but in every created thing, why can't we see it? I once heard a man whose dental work made it possible for him to actually hear radio broadcasts. Somehow the combination of fillings in his teeth accidentally turned his mouth into a primitive receiver, but he found the sound so distracting that he had the fillings replaced. The radio signals were still there. He just chose not to hear them anymore. Am I supposed to read virtual reality too? The next one on here?
No.
No, I didn't practice it, so I'm glad.
Okay. So my question is, having heard that story, what did it connect you with? What did you think about? What were your first reactions to it? You had an Atari set, so you've been there. We can say, part of that experience I know. I used to sit in my underwear in front of the television set playing that bing, bing. That was a picture. What did you think? Where did the story lead you to? Say it loudly, please.
We associated with it.
You can associate with it.
I have no idea why you had me read that until we got to the very, very end. And then maybe if the word creator hadn't been capitalized, I still might not have known what you were getting at.
So here is Larry Kushner telling you a story, and in one letter, he makes the story come into focus. And so often in life, is it not true that we go through certain experiences that we just go through, and it's okay, and it's very nice, and oh, look, there's another room here, but it takes a little something, a little someone, a little incident to all of a sudden allow us to understand it or to comprehend it and embrace it. And now, he says, this is about spirituality. Where does this story lead you in terms of spirituality? What is its message? If the story is in fact a midrash, an explication of mystical principles, what is the story teaching us?
Be more attentive.
Be more attentive. Because if you pay attention, you might see more than met the eye. Go ahead.
What stood out to me was the sense that this hidden room had nothing to do with winning the game. And so that sense of how we miss God in part because we're trying to win life instead of see him.
All right, all of you are very intelligent rabbis. And she's just said what struck her is that room where the signature of the Creator was had nothing to do with the game. What do you talk about? Where does that lead you? Leads me someplace. And let's not have these are all the people graduated from Walsh University in their gaming program. Okay, it's a new thing. Can't take history or philosophy anymore, but you can take gaming. So where does it lead you? What does it say to you? How does it make you grow? God is present whether we are aware or not, which I think that's the beauty. Go ahead.
Well, sometimes we judge ourselves for things that we think we've made mistakes playing God.
We play God. Yeah.
And we should maybe be open to what is happening to see what we should learn from what we just did or didn't do.
And that even in things that don't look like they direct us morally, religiously towards salvation or whatever it might be, even those are of God. God is present in the mundane things. One of the things that the Besh, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, used to say is that I know you can find God in these deep study experiences that the rabbis and the great academies have of Talmud and all that. And I know you can find God when you go out into the woods and see the beauty of creation. But you know, if you're a cobbler, you can find God just as you nail a shoe. The most ordinary, mundane thing. And what did Krishna say to us last week? He said, there is something about spirituality, about finding God in the least likely places. Any other comments? Please.
There are a couple things that I noticed, going to the door and nothing there. God is kind of teaching us, don't expect a reward every time you do something.
Sure. And
the other thing was that little dot. Those little things sometimes are the main things, and we just, they're important, those little dots sometimes.
Beautiful. So now you know, because of all the things that we've teased out of the story, and there are probably many more things, if you all had copies, it would be even a richer conversation. This is a Jewish book group. When we allow the text to open up all our different ideas and feelings. Who is the next reader? On the bus, Cindy? This will be a special. You will love the way she reads this story, Stranger on the Bus.
Right. Stranger on the bus. A light snow was falling, and the streets were crowded with people. It was Munich in Nazi Germany. One of my rabbinic students, Shifra Penza, told me her great-aunt Susie had been riding a city bus home from work when SS stormtroopers suddenly stopped the coach and began examining the identification papers of the passengers. Most were annoyed, but a few were terrified. Jews were being told to leave the bus and get into a truck around the corner. My student's great aunt watched from her seat in the rear of the bus. Systematically, the soldiers worked their way down the aisle. She began to tremble, tears streaming down her face. When the man next to her noticed that she was crying, he politely asked, "Why?" "I don't have the papers you have. I am a Jew. They're going to take me." Then the man exploded with disgust. He began to curse and scream at her. "You stupid bitch," he roared. "I can't stand being near you." The SS man asked what all the yelling was about. "Damn her," the man said angrily. "My wife has forgot her papers again. I'm so fed up. She always does this." The soldier laughed and moved on. My student said that her great aunt never saw the man again. She never even knew his name. You are going about your business when you stumble onto something that has your name on it, or, to be more accurate, a task with your name on it finds you. Its execution requires inconvenience, self-sacrifice, even risk. You step forward and encounter your destiny. This does not mean you must do everything that lands on your doorstep, or that you should assume every risk to make every self-sacrifice. But it does mean that you must tell yourself the truth about where you have been placed and why. You do not exercise your freedom by doing what you want. Self-indulgence is not an exercise of freedom. But when you accept the task that destiny seems to have set before you, you become free. Perhaps the only exercise of real freedom comes from doing what you were meant to do all along. If everything is connected to everything else, then everyone ultimately responsible for everything. We can blame nothing on anyone else. The more we comprehend our mutual interdependence, the more we fathom the implications of our most trivial acts. We find ourselves within a luminous organism of sacred responsibility, even on a bus in Munich.
Where does that story lead you initially? What are your first reactions to it? Help can come from the most unusual place.
The self-indulgence isn't an exercise of freedom. It's sort of the lie that we fight against all the time, I think.
It's like, we have choices between vanilla and chocolate. It's not a choice between life and death. It's not a choice between... Go ahead.
Resistance against evil.
And that might be our fundamental task in life. Might be.
I love that a simple act for the stranger, the man, affected generations. It's not just the individual, it's generations.
Play with that a little bit more. What did you mean? Generations.
It was a story about the great aunt, correct? And so this carried weight, not just for that individual woman on the bus, but that it carried forward beyond just her, just that moment, her life, her witness of that particular interaction carried forward and affected her future generations beyond her. Just incredible to me.
Think about for a minute the movie Schindler's List. I think most all of us have seen the movie. When the war was over and Schindler's Jews presented him with the ring, and the ring had on it the Talmudic expression, "He who saves a single life saves the entire world," and that's immediately followed by the image of all of the descendants of Schindler's Jews walking over the hill. So it's not, what all that means is that when this, one must presume, German individual on the bus, non-Jewish, sees the Nazis coming and hears her story and jumps up and says, "You stupid bitch," he has now guaranteed that there will be future generations. How powerful is that? And it's not life-saving only, it's helping to form and create history. And we hear that all the time. We think about people who died in the Holocaust, people who die in wars and so on, and we say, how many people who could have cured cancer, who could have gone to Mars, who could have would have come from these folks if they'd lived? Powerful thing. Anybody else have more? We have over here quite.
Yeah, I was thinking he could have not done anything, as we could not do anything any day at any moment, and what lives we're not affecting because we don't take action. We don't do what the Holy Spirit tells us to do. We ignore him.
Well, and there's another road that sounds better, but it is no better, and that is, oh, I'm so sorry. You're in my hopes and prayers. It's very nice to hope and pray, but to take the risk to do something, and that was risky for this man on the bus. If they had questioned further, the Nazi officer could have taken him away to the concentration camps, and God knows what would have happened to him. Well, God did know what would have happened to him. So sometimes we have to have the courage to go beyond just the feeling of thoughts and prayers. Sideline. There is a difference between giving charity and giving tzedakah. You know the term tzedakah in Hebrew? It's sometimes translated as charity because that's the Western, or, oh my goodness, this is good coffee. That is the Western and by and large Christian way of thinking about what happens when the plate comes by and you put something in. Okay? You put it in because you like the church, the message was good, you're expected to give. That's charity. The root of charity is caritas. Your heart is warmed. I give because I see that little dog on the television and it's freezing outside, which, by the way, is what they were meant to do. They'd be outside and they get cold. But no, it's so bad. It's a horrible thing. And therefore, I am moved to give charity. But tzedakah is not giving when you are moved to give. It's giving because it's an obligation to give. It is righteousness. You have an obligation to give to the poor. They don't have to demonstrate how worn their clothes are, how I have plenty, but I have I'm no fat on my bones, I can't eat. You have an obligation to give. And that's the difference between the two concepts. Both are valuable. I don't know how I got there, but that's okay. Any more comments about stranger on the bus?
When you're going to be used, and maybe none of us know when we might be used, like that German man, and when you're or somebody else is in the right place at the right time for you, or you for them, you never know when that might be.
There is a prayer that was turned into a song by our youth group people a decade or two ago. The song, we call the song the Nana song because it goes na 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 na, and then it goes into the text. And the prayer goes, Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, sovereign of the universe, shenatan lanu hizdamnut letakein et haolam, who gives us another opportunity to repair the world. The opportunities are always there in how we treat other people and how we look at the news and our response to so on and so forth. In a sense, we are all strangers on the bus, and the opportunities to save a life, to improve a life, to make the world come together are always before us. Any other comments? Please, Brad.
Thanks. I was struck by the imagination of the creativity of this person on the bus. He finessed that situation. Moral imagination is, I think, probably pretty important in our daily lives.
Yeah. And it was instantaneous. Okay, anybody else? We move on. Whoop. You remember that story, the poem that Kushner wrote? The jigsaw poem? Each of us has one more or many more pieces that we don't need, and when we give them to somebody else, we make them whole. Right. Right. Very good. Absolutely very good. I love that story. It just is a wonderful story. All right, we ready for the next one?
First, a message from your sponsor.
It's a radio. This is called Act of God. About 17 years ago, as was our family's custom back in the days when the children were young, we would all go out for dinner at Burger King. For us in those years, it qualified as dinner at a restaurant. On the way home, if we had a little time and a little money, we might stop at Marshall's discount clothing store. The kids would play hide and seek among the racks of clothing, and Karen and I would browse for bargains. On one such evening, I caught a glimpse of a tall, carefully made-up, attractive woman out of the corner of my eye. She seemed, even at first glance, to be distraught. Pretending not to notice her as she moved into the aisle where I stood, I saw that she was very pregnant and accompanied by a man. They were discreetly moving toward me, and she was trying to catch my eye. But even if she did, I would have feigned ignorance. Yes, I know, I'm a rabbi, a public person, but give me a break. This public person happens to be shopping for clothes. It didn't work. She was closing in and moving through the bright fluorescent lights and muzak like a guided missile. "Aren't you Rabbi Kushner?" I could lie, but instead I answered, "Yes, I am. Have we met?" "Not exactly. We attended a service you did. My husband and I thought you were very nice." But before I could even acknowledge her compliment, she moved on in for the kill. "Rabbi, we were at the doctor's this afternoon. The third opinion. He says I have an inoperable tumor. I'm going to die. He says that the baby will be fine," she added, holding her belly. "But I only have got 6 months at the most." Her husband was trying to look strong, but his eyes seemed abnormally red. "Oh, my God, I'm sorry. Is there something I can do?" Stupid question. Sure, a miracle maybe, right here between the sweaters and men's slacks. Nothing big, mind you, just let her live to see her kid grow up. Something like that. "Hey, Dad, could I buy this t-shirt with a picture of Superman on it?" Not now, son. Go find Mom. I have to talk to these people. It's important." They introduced themselves, gave me the details. They'd been thinking about joining my congregation. Their world had collapsed. Why has this happened? Would I do the funeral? They joined. She bore a daughter. She died. I did the funeral. There are 2 ways to understand our relationship with God. God can be above us, or we can be within God. In the first, it is possible for us to have a relationship with God. There are 2 discrete parties who can each behave freely and independently. And since God is other than the world, there must be some things which are not God. A devil, an evil instinct, the dark side of the force. Evil has its own independent existence. It is in business for itself. In the second model, we are within God. We are one with God. God is everywhere and everything. All being derives its reality from God. According to this paradigm, if God is within all creation, then what appears as evil can only be a distant, albeit distorted, expression of the divine. This doesn't make it good, but nothing can be entirely separate from or independent of God. Everything, therefore, is the way it is, quote, supposed, unquote, to be. At the end of the book of Job, God shows Job the whole awesome pageant of life and death. Lions tear apart gazelles, vultures rip flesh, thunderstorms, earthquakes, everything. Then God says to Job, in effect, "What do you think of that, huh? I hope you liked it, because I'm in that too. Not just in feeling good, but everything." The stories with happy endings distract our attention from all the other painful stories. They say to us that somehow things work out, even though it often seems like they don't. For a moment, it seems possible that our grief may be due only to our own myopia. The seeds of the giant redwoods, after all, are capable of germinating only once they have been through the intense heat of a forest fire. Not long ago, I was sitting with the other members of my synagogue's high school faculty over a Monday night pizza supper. We were surveying the students. Even after a long day of school, their energy astonished us. My glance settled on a short, vivacious, red-haired girl of 17. I pretended I was not looking, but I did not mean to intrude on their fun. She had finished telling a joke or playing some kind of prank. Her face had a grin as irrepressible as the sunrise. Everyone laughed with her. She is popular. The group erupted with joy. A few minutes later, she came over to our table and asked if I would read over a creative worship service she had written for an upcoming youth conclave. "Why not? I need a good laugh," I said with a wink. I love that girl. I am honored that she looks up to me. That girl's father never did remarry. Last week, I whispered to another teacher, her dad told me that his daughter was thinking of becoming a rabbi. Look, I don't think God has made a tumor grow in that girl's mother's brain so that God has or that God has anything to do with the choice of careers or where I used to shop for bargain basement clothes. But I can't get it out of my head that somehow God is mixed up in the whole horrible, holy, and joyous goddamn thing.
Your responses.
Since I know where you're going, and I've been reading this all week, I'm going to jump in. The first time I read this, I was disturbed by it. Rabbi Kushner certainly knows how to tell a good story, and it's very engaging. It's full of humor and pathos, and most importantly, it ends optimistically. But what disturbed me is that I guess and you and I are good friends, Rabbi Spitzer, so I'm going to be honest here. I really fundamentally disagreed with his assumptions here that he's working with. I prefer to have a God who's distinct from me, rather than a God that I'm within. I'd rather have a God that I can have a relationship with and who can stand beside me when I'm struggling with pain and suffering, rather than some God that's all around. And that's simply my response to this. But when I first read it, and my wife had to listen to me for a while when I was sort of processing it. But after I first read it, that was sort of my response to it. And I'll pass this on.
I can understand that for sure. But remember, Kushner's a mystic. He's a modern mystic, but a mystic nonetheless. And sometimes your fundamental assumptions shape the stories that you tell. And I think what he was trying to say is that the universe is coherent, even when you don't like it to be. It fits together that way. Go ahead, pass the mic. Who else wants to comment? And you can comment on Brad's comments as well. Boy, did that make everybody quiet.
I had some of the similar reaction to Brad. Because, I guess I want to say both and, not either or. That God is transcendent and not limited by what we see and what creation is. And yet, we can see God in our lives, in creation. And so this story, I guess, and how he emphasizes it, I was a little uncomfortable with how far, I had to keep saying, he's not saying pantheism, but it felt pulled in that direction.
Both and. I like that. Sometimes the theologies that we have end up in what appears to be a blind alley. You know, I think I have a relationship with God and I've lived a good life and I pray for this, that, and the other thing, and they don't happen. We hit a blind alley. And the only thing that we can use when we are in that blind alley is the faith that it all makes sense. So we go from the semi-rational, irrational, to the mystical. Or we go through life thinking that everything is God, and whatever happens, even though it looks bad, is good. The Hasidim say a prayer that they thank God for all the bad things that happen to them, because it's only through those they feel that they can learn and grow in spirit and faith. But in the end, when they're on the deathbed, when they're taking chemotherapy and all that sort of stuff, they pray as though God were sitting in the chair next to them. So both and. For me, personally, that's what I would call like my 90% faith. That means that everything makes sense 90% of the time. And that last 10%, that last 5%, that I can't figure out, that I can't make sense of, that's where my real faith comes into being. That I believe in that which I cannot see nor understand. And it's not that the faith and belief helps me understand what I can't understand. It's to believe that what I perceive as a universe that makes sense, even in this situation, makes sense. Last story, because it's according to that. Oh my goodness, it's only 10 after. You tricked me. This is the last word, and that's the name of the chapter. Interestingly enough, it's the last story in the book. My mother, who turned 80 more than a few years ago, tells me that as you get older, it only gets worse. No matter what you say, God always has the last word. That strikes me as wise, especially from a woman who has refined to a high art the skill of getting in the last word. But it does make me wonder, what exactly is the last word? If you and God have been adversaries, then the last word might be a triumphant, I'm God, you're not. Or even worse, I'm God, you're dead. If you've been friends and developed a good working relationship, the last word might be, thanks for all your help. But if, after all those years, you've come to understand God as the infinite one of whom you are a finite dimension, a unique but fleeting expression, then it would be, I'm God, so are you. Or maybe just, what took you so long? But of course, with all the distinctions gone, the idea of a conversation is itself only a confusing metaphor. What can a wave say to the ocean? What can the ocean say to a wave? Before you begin our journey, we are one with all creation. Once life begins, we find ourselves discrete, individuated, autonomous. And after the journey ends, God gets the last word. Welcome. With some luck, we get glimmers of the great unity even during our lifetime. We realize that our life and everything else has all been part of the divine organism all along, that things are turning out just the way God intends. This is not to say that God is running the world like some overextended, occasionally underperforming puppeteer, depriving us of our freedom or moral responsibility. God is simply within all of it. And when we become aware of this, as we do during moments of great meaning or insight, it is as if God were the one who unites and therefore runs everything. Questions of free will and determinism become meaningless. Everything exists within and derives its reality from God, including us. We are dimensions of the divine psyche, seeking to become fully self-aware. And when we raise our consciousness, we not only realize that we have never really been apart from our divine source at all, we realize that we also participate in the process itself. You may not be able to have an intimate relationship with such a God, but you are in its pride and joy, its best hope. My colleague, Rabbi Nehemiah Poland, taught me that the world simply is. It is the way it is supposed to be, the way it must be. Such a vision is achieved by a surrender of the ego, by submerging yourself in the enveloping waters of the divine being. We say the last word, oh my God, to the universe, and we lose ourselves as we do so. Being is not from or by God, it is of God. There is only one player, God. In the words of Deuteronomy, the Lord alone is God. There is nothing else. All theology is autobiography. Of all the stories, this is the one you have to read several times. All theology is autobiography. Kushner's book is, I think, an extraordinary thing. It's quite nice reading. It's good if you have younger kids. Well, all of our kids are younger, but they're not that young. If you have younger grandchildren, let's put it that way, these are good stories to read, I think. Biblical stories are nice, but they're from the Bible, that old dusty book, that's way back when. But these are very contemporary stories. They sound very contemporary. And they can spark a real conversation, I think, with young people. I hope that you heard from these stories, from these contemporary Midrash Agadah, how he has told stories that underscore and amplify his understanding of Jewish mysticism. And you might not be a mystic, or you might only be a little bit of a mystic, or you might be a real rationalist. That sometimes sparks a lot of sparks. When the Hasidim first came into being, when the Baal Shem Tov began to say to the poor people who had to work every day for a living to scrounge enough money to buy their bread and to make Shabbos and all those kinds of things, they stood up and against the great, well-educated rabbis from the academies of Babylonia and Pumbedita and so on, the Talmudic scholars who said the way to ascend to God is this heady intellectualism. Study the Talmud, learn the laws, be able to do the debate. They become called the Misnagdim, the people who were against the Hasidim, because the Hasidim said Talmud study is very nice, but you can draw close to God by putting your arms around your neighbor on Shabbos and singing a nigun, a song without words. You can get very close to God by dancing. You can get very close to God simply by hammering the nails in the shoe. So they actually came to blows very often. And that caused a real rift. It was one of those situations in which you could say the Talmud scholars won and the Hasidim won, because both have been very much involved in preserving Jewish life. You're looking at your watch. Is it time? Almost time. Next week, we will begin to take a look at some methods of Jewish study. What do Jewish texts look like? How did Jewish prayer evolve into a Seder, an order of prayer, and so on and so forth? And we'll use Rabbi Larry Hoffman. So any comments for the good of the group? I want to thank our dramatic readers. I particularly like Dr. Beach's readings because when he was talking about